It was a Wednesday. That kind of midweek day where the weekend is still a distant dream, and Monday's misery hasn't fully faded. The kind of day where you just exist, moving through life in the same predictable rhythm. Wake up, work, go home, repeat. And then, just when you think you've got a handle on your quiet, uneventful little existence, the universe decides to entertain itself at your expense. I was sitting in my car, parked outside of a Home Depot, contemplating whether or not I had the energy to actually go inside. I needed a new drill. Not because I had anything important to build, just because I was a grown man, and owning power tools made me feel accomplished. There was something deeply satisfying about having a fully stocked toolbox, even if most of the things inside had only been used once. I sat there, debating the pros and cons of exerting effort, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mother, reminding me for the third time that week that communication keeps a marriage alive, and asking if Lisa and I had planned a summer vacation yet. I rolled my eyes and sent back the standard, non-committal, "Yeah, Mom, we're thinking about it." Translation: No, we had not thought about it. Lisa had been too busy, and I had been too indifferent. Lisa, my wife of 7 years, was the kind of woman who could walk into a room and somehow make people feel like they had to stand up straighter. She had that aura of being important, even if she was just ordering coffee. It's not that she was intimidating. She just had a way of making people want to impress her. It was one of the things I had admired about her when we first met. Now it mostly meant I had spent the last 2 years feeling like an underperforming intern in my own marriage. I sighed, tossed my phone onto the passenger seat, and finally got out of the car. Inside Home Depot, I was reminded why I hated hardware stores. There is something deeply humbling about standing in front of an entire wall of drills, all claiming to be the most powerful, while some retired handyman named Jerry eyes you with the pity of a man who knows you have no idea what you're doing. After 10 minutes of staring blankly at the options, I grabbed the first one that didn't have words like industrial or demolition on it and went to checkout. That's when I saw him. Or rather, I saw them. Lisa was supposed to be at work. That's where she always was: long hours, late nights, endless meetings with important people whose names I pretended to care about. But she was not at work. She was here, in Home Depot, standing a few aisles away, laughing at something some guy had just said. Now, I'm not the jealous type. I don't get weird about Lisa having male friends. But there is something uniquely unsettling about seeing your wife standing too close to a man you don't recognize, in the middle of a store she has no reason to be in, while wearing the smile she used to save for you. And then, just to twist the knife, she did something that made my stomach tighten. She reached out and touched his arm. You have to understand, Lisa is not a touchy person. With me, sure, she used to be. But with strangers? No. She has that personal space is sacred energy. I've seen her sidestep people at parties like she was avoiding laser tripwires. But this guy? Apparently, he was an exception. I had two choices. Walk away and pretend I hadn't seen anything, or walk straight up to her and ask why the love of my life was standing in the power tool section looking like she was auditioning for the role of flirty wife in a rom-com. Naturally, I chose option 3, passive-aggressive chaos. I grabbed a random tape measure, walked straight over, and in my best I'm just a happy husband doing nothing suspicious voice, said, "Hey, babe. Didn't know you'd be here. Thought you had that meeting with your boss." The moment Lisa heard my voice, she stiffened. It was quick, almost unnoticeable, but I caught it. The guy, meanwhile, had that deer-in-the-headlights look, like I had just caught him sneaking into Area 51. Lisa turned, her smile tight, like she was trying to force her brain to load an excuse while running on 2% battery. "Christopher." "Hey, I was just..." Her voice trailed off. I let the silence sit there. Let her squirm. It was satisfying in a way I knew I shouldn't enjoy. Finally, she exhaled, forcing a laugh. I ran into Mark here, and we just, got to talking about home projects. You know how I've been thinking about redoing the guest room." "Mark." "Sure." I looked at Mark, who had yet to contribute to this conversation, and gave him the kind of smile that wasn't really a smile at all. "Oh yeah? What's your take on the guest room situation, Mark?" Mark blinked. Clearly, his brain had not been programmed for a confrontation scenario. Well, I mean, she was just saying." Lisa jumped in like a lifeguard rescuing a drowning man. "He was just recommending some paint brands. I wasn't sure if I should go with eggshell or satin." Of course," I said, nodding like a fool. "So you left work, drove across town, and just happened to run into Mark the paint expert in the power tool section?" Lisa forced another laugh. It sounded like it was dying inside. Well, cool, I said, cutting her off. And tell me, Mark, do you work here? Or do you just hang out in Home Depot in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon? Mark did what I can only describe as a nervous shuffle. I work in, real estate. I nodded, like that answer made any sense. Right. So, real estate guy, standing in the drill section, helping my wife pick out paint. Lisa's face was red now. Christopher, stop. You're making this weird. I was making this weird. Right. I looked back at Mark. Buddy, if you're gonna be my wife's personal paint consultant, the least you could do is recommend a good drill. I've been standing here for 20 minutes trying to figure out which one won't take my hand off. Mark looked at Lisa, then at me, then back at Lisa, as if she would suddenly morph into a lifeline. When that didn't happen, he mumbled something about needing to go. Lisa didn't stop him. And that? That told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just some random meeting. This wasn't about paint. This was something. I watched Mark leave, then turned back to Lisa, who was now very interested in the ceiling. So, I said casually, how long has this home improvement project been going on? Lisa swallowed. Christopher, please. It's not. Not what? Not what it looks like. Not what I think. Because, Lisa, I gotta tell you, unless Home Depot is offering secret marriage counseling in aisle 14, I'm thinking this isn't great. She had nothing. No excuse. No comeback. And that? That was when I knew my marriage was already over. Lisa didn't follow me out of Home Depot. I didn't expect her to. I also didn't expect an immediate confession, a dramatic apology, or any attempt at damage control. She wasn't that type of person. Lisa was the pretend nothing happened until it becomes impossible to ignore type. The let's discuss this when you're in a better mood type. The technically you didn't see anything, so technically I don't have to explain type. That was fine. Because I wasn't in the mood for explanations. I was in the mood for answers. By the time I got home, Lisa had already returned. She was in the living room, pretending to scroll through her phone like she wasn't waiting for me to say something first. It was a solid strategy. If you act like nothing's wrong long enough, sometimes the other person starts questioning whether they imagine the whole thing. Unfortunately for Lisa, I had spent years working in finance, where gaslighting people into thinking bad decisions were actually good ones was a required skill. I knew how the game worked. Paint colors? Huh? I said, dropping the drill bag on the counter. Lisa glanced up, gave a forced little smile, and nodded. Yeah, I thought it might be nice to redo the guest room. The guest room. Yeah. I leaned against the counter and crossed my arms. The guest room that no guest has used in 3 years? Lisa shrugged like this was a normal conversation. Well, I just thought. No, I love this idea, I said, nodding. Really? In fact, since you're in such a home improvement mood, we should do a full renovation. New floors. New doors. Maybe knock down a few walls. Start fresh. Lisa's fingers tightened around her phone. I smiled. Where did you meet him? Lisa's face didn't change, but I knew her well enough to catch the quick flicker in her eyes. The microsecond of recalibration. The moment where her brain had to decide whether to lie or deflect. I don't know what you mean, she said, voice steady. Interesting. Mark. The guy in Home Depot. The one you just happened to run into while researching paint like your life depended on it. Lisa sighed, setting her phone down. Christopher, don't do this. Do what? Ask normal questions about my wife's new passion for power tools. You're blowing this out of proportion. There it was. The first attempt at dismissing the entire situation. The classic, you're the one overreacting move. It would have been more effective if I hadn't seen it a dozen times before, just never directed at me. I tilted my head. All right. Convince me. What's the totally normal explanation for why you were touching some guy's arm in the middle of Home Depot while he looked like he was deciding whether to run or drop to his knees and beg for forgiveness? Lisa rubbed her temple like I was giving her a headache. I told you, I ran into him by accident. And what? You two just clicked over the shared trauma of choosing between eggshell and satin. Lisa's jaw clenched. I'm not going to sit here and be interrogated like I committed a crime. Good news, Lisa. This isn't an interrogation. It's just a husband having a totally casual chat with his wife about her secret Home Depot friendships. She exhaled sharply and grabbed her phone again. I don't have to explain myself to you. That was the wrong answer. Lisa. My voice was calm. Too calm. You can either give me the explanation now, or I can go find it myself. I turned and walked out of the room before she could respond. Now, let's be clear, I am not an impulsive person. I don't make snap decisions. I analyze, I assess, and then I make my move. But in that moment, there was only one thing I wanted to do. I grabbed my laptop, sat at the kitchen table, and did what any man would do when faced with the sudden realization that his wife might be a liar. I started a full-scale investigation. First stop, social media. Lisa wasn't big on posting, but she did like to comment. She had a circle, a core group of coworkers, college friends, and gym buddies she interacted with regularly. Mark, however, was not one of them. So, who was Mark? There were three possible explanations. He was a coworker she had never mentioned. He was a gym guy she had never mentioned. He was a complete stranger she had no reason to be laughing with in a hardware store. None of these explanations were good. Next, I pulled up our shared bank account. Not because I expected to see some dramatic evidence of betrayal in the form of hotel charges or expensive dinners. I wasn't that lucky, but because money leaves patterns. People leave patterns. And Lisa, despite her best efforts, had a pattern. And that pattern included a string of unaccounted for cash withdrawals over the past 6 months. Lisa hated cash. She considered it inconvenient, messy, and for people who didn't understand the benefits of digital banking. If she was taking out money regularly, it wasn't random. I clicked through the transaction history, narrowing my eyes at the dates. Every withdrawal was made on a Thursday or a Friday. I frowned. Lisa didn't work Fridays. I leaned back in my chair, tapping my fingers against the table. I wasn't jumping to conclusions. I was just gathering facts. And the facts were lining up in a way that looked less like random chance and more like a pattern of behavior. And then I found it. The most recent withdrawal had been last Thursday. And the transaction? A cash ATM located exactly 1 mile away from Home Depot. I stared at the screen, exhaling through my nose. Lisa was many things, but she wasn't sloppy. She was careful, calculated. If she was doing something she shouldn't be, she had convinced herself she wasn't going to get caught. That annoyed me more than anything. I closed the laptop, stood up, and grabbed my keys. Lisa wanted to act like nothing was happening? Fine. But I was about to find out exactly how deep this went. If Lisa had been in the witness protection program, she wouldn't have been able to cover her tracks any better. She wasn't careless, she wasn't reckless, and she certainly wasn't stupid. That was what made this whole situation so insulting. If she had been the kind of person who got caught easily, I could have at least pretended it was a mistake, a lapse in judgment, some heat-of-the-moment decision she instantly regretted. But this had planning written all over it. And that meant that at some point, Lisa had decided I wasn't worth worrying about. That was the part that really got to me. Not that she was hiding something. Not that she was pulling money out in small, calculated amounts or suddenly developing a passionate interest in home renovation at hardware stores I had never seen her step foot in before. No, the real issue was that she had confidence. Confidence that I wouldn't notice, that I wouldn't question, that I wouldn't figure it out. And that was a mistake. Now, I'm not a naturally paranoid guy. Up until today, I had been perfectly content believing my marriage was built on normal things, like mutual respect and the occasional argument about whether or not dishwashers were supposed to be pre-rinsed. They absolutely are. But Lisa had changed the rules. So now, I had to play the game. Step 1. Find out who Mark really was. Since Lisa wasn't fool enough to have any obvious connections to him online, I had to take a different approach. I wasn't about to hire a private investigator. That felt too dramatic, even for me, but I also wasn't about to just sit around waiting for more information to fall into my lap. So, I did what any person would do when they needed information but didn't want to make it too obvious. I went to the source. I walked into Lisa's home office and grabbed the first thing I saw, her old planner. Lisa was an obsessive list maker. She had to write things down, even if she later transferred them to her phone. And sure enough, flipping through the pages of the past 6 months, I found exactly what I was looking for. 2 months ago, she had written down meeting, 3 p.m. Mark, real estate. Bingo. Now, under normal circumstances, I probably would have gone straight to Lisa and asked why she was meeting with a real estate agent in secret. But these weren't normal circumstances, and Lisa had already proven that she wasn't going to give me an honest answer, which meant I had to become the problem she hadn't accounted for. Step 2. Visit Mark. Since I wasn't about to go knocking on his door like a fool, I took a more subtle approach. A quick online search later, I found his business website. Big smiling picture of him right on the front page, looking like the kind of guy who takes himself way too seriously. The kind of guy who calls himself a go-getter, without irony. The kind of guy who uses words like synergy in casual conversation. Perfect. I clicked on his contact page and found what I needed, an address for his office. Not a home address, unfortunately, but I wasn't that lucky. So, I got in my car and drove. When I arrived, I didn't walk in immediately. I sat outside, observing. His office wasn't anything special, just a small, single-story building in a strip mall, wedged between a nail salon and a vape shop. A classy location for a guy who apparently had enough influence over my wife's schedule to get multiple meetings. After about 15 minutes, I saw him, Mark, walking out of his office, talking on his phone, completely unaware that I was sitting there. Watching him like a completely sane and normal husband who was definitely not considering whether I could legally install GPS trackers without violating any federal laws. I didn't move. I didn't get out of the car. I just watched. And that's when I noticed something interesting. He wasn't alone. A woman, tall, blonde, very put together, stepped out of the office behind him. She wasn't a client. She wasn't carrying any paperwork, didn't have the usual, "I'm here to pretend I understand mortgage rates" expression. She looked comfortable. She also looked very familiar, because I had seen her before, at Lisa's office. Lisa had introduced her as Karen, one of her colleagues. So now, the question wasn't just, why was Lisa meeting Mark? The question was, why is Lisa's coworker involved in this? Step 3, connect the dots. At this point, I could have gone home, confronted Lisa, demanded an answer. But I already knew how that would go. I needed something better. So I did something I had never done before in my entire life. I made a real estate inquiry. I walked into Mark's office, smiled at the receptionist, and did my absolute best impression of a man who was looking to buy property instead of a man who was trying to ruin someone's day. "Hi," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I'm looking for an agent." The receptionist looked up, gave me a polite but bored expression. "Do you have an appointment?" "Nope," I said. But I figured I'd stop by anyway. My wife said she had spoken to Mark before about some listings, and I thought I'd follow up. That got her attention. "Your wife?" I nodded, smiling. "Lisa." There was just the briefest hesitation before she covered it up with a professional nod. "I had her." "Oh, sure," she said. "I believe he's worked with her before." "Worked with her?" Interesting choice of words. "Yeah," I said, pretending like I knew exactly what I was talking about. I just wanted to get some details. You know, about what property she was looking at. Another pause. A little longer this time. Then, the receptionist did something that changed everything. She pulled up a file on her computer. A physical file. Lisa wasn't just meeting with Mark. She had paperwork. I kept my face neutral, like this wasn't a huge revelation. "So, what kind of places was she looking at?" The receptionist hesitated. I'm not sure I can share that without her permission." Which meant Lisa wasn't just browsing. She was buying. And not with me. The receptionist had no idea she had just handed me a loaded weapon. She might as well have printed out a detailed document titled, "How Your Wife is Lying to You," complete with addresses and signatures. But she didn't need to. That one little phrase, "I'm not sure I can share that without her permission," had already given me everything I needed. Lisa was buying property. Not looking. Not just exploring options. Buying. And she wasn't doing it with me. At that moment, I had two choices. One, I could demand answers immediately, march straight home, and let Lisa spin whatever half-baked explanation she had waiting. Or two, I could get every single fact before I made my move. Option 2 was clearly the winner. "All right," I said, giving the receptionist my best "I'm a normal husband with normal questions" smile. "I totally understand. Privacy and all that. But I'd love to set up an appointment with Mark anyway. Just to, stay in the loop." She nodded, still polite but definitely curious now. "Of course. Let me check his availability." A minute later, I had an appointment for the next afternoon. I walked out of there feeling like I had just planted a bomb with a 24-hour countdown. But why stop there? Lisa had done me a favor. She had made this interesting. I spent the rest of the afternoon on my laptop, doing my own research. Step 1. Checking public records. Turns out, property records are shockingly easy to access. A few clicks later, I had confirmation. Lisa had inquired about a mortgage 3 months ago. Step 2. Confirming Mark's connection to Karen, her coworker. This part was just funny. A little social media digging, and I found out Karen wasn't just friendly with Mark, she was his sister. Lisa was working with the sister of the real estate agent she was secretly buying property with. This was like watching a low-budget crime show where the criminals think they're being sneaky but leave their fingerprints all over the crime scene. Step 3. Finding out what, exactly, Lisa was trying to buy. For that, I had to get creative. So I made a call. Not to Lisa. Not to Mark. To our bank. "Hi," I said, keeping my voice casual. "I just wanted to check in on a mortgage application under my wife's name. Lisa Carter. I want to make sure everything's in order before we finalize any joint paperwork." There was a pause. "Sir, I'm seeing an application under Lisa Carter, but it's not listed as a joint account. Would you like me to request access for you?" "That would be great," I said, grinning. "Could you also confirm the listed co-applicant?" Another pause. "Then, it appears there is no co-applicant. Just Lisa Carter." Lisa had applied for a solo mortgage. I could almost respect the effort. Almost. But here's where Lisa had made a massive mistake. Because we had a joint account. And banks? Banks love cross-referencing financials. Which meant, within the next 24 hours, Lisa was going to get a very interesting phone call. It was time to speed things up. The next morning, I went about my routine as if nothing had changed. Lisa, of course, was acting normal, because that's what people like her do. She had no idea that her carefully built house of lies had termites in the foundation. But I had one more move to make before I truly went in for the win. I went to my meeting with Mark. He greeted me like I was just another client. No suspicion. No hesitation. That alone told me everything. Lisa hadn't mentioned me at all. "Christopher," Mark said, shaking my hand like we were old buddies. "What can I do for you today?" I sat down, smiling. "Well, Mark, I'm actually here because I heard my wife has been looking into property, and I wanted to make sure we're on the same page before making any big decisions." Mark froze. It was barely noticeable, just a flicker in his expression. But it was there. He recovered quickly. "Oh, Lisa. Yeah. She's been exploring some options. Nothing finalized yet." I leaned back in my chair. Right. She mentioned something about looking at a new place, but I wanted to hear directly from you. Since, I assume I'll be on the paperwork too." Mark hesitated. I let the silence sit. And then, just as I expected, he made a mistake. "Well, we actually hadn't gotten to that part yet. I think she was just trying to get a feel for things before bringing you in." I laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because Mark was horrible at this. "Mark," I said, shaking my head. "That's really interesting. Because I already spoke to the bank. And according to them, Lisa's mortgage application? It's solo." Mark's face went white. I stood up, smiling. "Thanks, Mark," I said. "You've been really helpful. Can't wait to chat with Lisa about this." Then I walked out. And that was when the real fun began. Because I didn't go straight home. No, I took a little detour. To Lisa's office. I walked in like I owned the place, waved at the receptionist, and headed straight for Karen's desk. She looked up, startled. "Christopher." "Karen," I said, all friendly. "Hey, quick question. How's your brother?" She blinked. "Excuse me." "Mark," I said, grinning. Your brother. The one helping Lisa buy a house." Karen looked like she had just swallowed a whole lemon. She started. "Don't worry," I said, holding up a hand. "I already know everything. Just thought you'd like a heads up before this whole thing blows up." And then I turned and walked out. By the time I got home, Lisa was already waiting. She had gotten the bank call. She had spoken to Karen. She had realized, far too late, that she was about to have a very bad day. I closed the door behind me, tossed my keys onto the counter, and smiled. "Lisa," I said, "I think it's time we had a little chat." Lisa was standing in the middle of the living room like someone had just informed her that oxygen had been outlawed. Hands clasped, shoulders stiff, that carefully rehearsed expression of devastated innocence that people only put on when they know they've been caught but haven't decided on which excuse to use yet. I set my bag down, took my time hanging up my jacket, then turned to her. "So," I said, stretching the word out like I had all the time in the world. "Which version of the story are we going with today?" Lisa blinked, like she was offended by the very idea that she might be lying. "Christopher, what are you even talking about?" I laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because this woman was unreal. "Lisa," I said, sighing. "You know exactly what I'm talking about. So why don't we just cut to the part where you try to convince me that none of this is what it looks like?" She pressed her lips together like she was trying to gather all the unearned courage she had left in her body. "I can explain." I gestured toward the couch. "Oh, please do. This should be good." She sat down, hands twisting in her lap. The classic, look how fragile and overwhelmed I am performance. I wondered if she had practiced it in the mirror before I got home. I wasn't going to keep it from you, she started, voice soft, tragic. I was just waiting for the right time to tell you. The right time, I repeated. Right. Because when you're secretly buying a house behind your husband's back, timing is everything. Lisa flinched, like my words were physically painful. It wasn't like that. Oh, wasn't it? I leaned against the counter. Because, funny enough, when the bank called me this afternoon, they sure seemed to think that you were applying for a single mortgage. She inhaled sharply. You went to the bank? I did. And you know where else I went? I tilted my head. To Mark's office. Lisa froze. Bingo. She hadn't expected that part. I had a great chat with him, I continued. Real stand-up guy. Except for the part where he had no idea I even existed. Lisa opened her mouth, then closed it. Then tried again. I cut in, if you're going to lie, at least commit to it. Stammering like a bad soap opera character really takes the impact away. Lisa looked ready to cry. Unfortunately for her, I had retired from sympathy. Christopher, please, she whispered. Just let me explain. I crossed my arms. Go ahead. But keep in mind, I already know everything. That part wasn't entirely true. I still had a few missing pieces. But Lisa didn't know that. Her lips trembled. It wasn't about what you think. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, great. So, enlighten me. What exactly was it about? Lisa launched into her masterpiece. The story she had been saving for months, just in case I ever caught on. It went like this. She had been thinking about our future. She had been worried about me. About us. She had seen how tired I was lately, how stressed. She wanted to surprise me. To give me something new. A fresh start. A place just for us. She hadn't told me because she wanted it to be a gift. A new home. A new chapter. A sign of her love. It was, without a doubt, the most beautifully packaged nonsense I had ever heard in my life. I let the silence sit for a moment. Let her believe, just for a second, that maybe I was considering buying into it. Then I shook my head. That's incredible, I said, slow clapping. Really? If there was an award for creative lying, you'd have swept the competition. Lisa's eyes widened. She hadn't expected me to call her bluff immediately. You don't believe me? She whispered, like the thought was unbearable. I laughed. Actually laughed. Lisa, come on. You expect me to believe that you were secretly buying a house for us. She nodded, pathetically hopeful. Right? I said, rubbing my chin. That makes total sense. Because most people express their love by hiding financial transactions from their spouse. Lisa wasn't ready for this level of pushback. I just wanted it to be special, she whispered, voice cracking like she was on the verge of melting into a tragic puddle of guilt and heartbreak. But I wasn't buying it. Because this wasn't guilt. It was damage control. You know what would have been special? I said, telling me, including me, acting like I was your husband instead of an obstacle to be worked around. She wiped at her eyes. I know, No, I cut in. You don't get to do that. You don't get to sit here and act like you just made a tiny mistake. Lisa sniffled. It wasn't like that. Oh, wasn't it? I leaned forward. Then tell me, Lisa, what was Karen's role in all this? Her face drained of color. Gotcha. Because she hadn't expected me to know about that. I don't. I grinned. Lisa, stop. You're embarrassing yourself. The act was falling apart. She knew it. I knew it. She had been so confident that I would be too blind, too trusting, too naive to ever question anything. And now, here we were. Lisa was out of moves. She was drowning. So, she did the only thing she had left. She begged. Christopher, she whispered. Please. I don't want to lose you. I stared at her. Oh, you don't. She shook her head furiously. No. I love you. No. I cut in, my voice calm. You love the version of me that didn't ask questions. You love the guy who never assumed you were capable of something like this. But guess what? Lisa held her breath. That guy. I said. He's gone. Her face crumbled. For the first time since I walked in, she actually looked afraid. Because she could tell. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't angry. I was done. Lisa had spent months carefully building a lie. And I had just burned it to the ground. Lisa wasn't crying anymore. She had moved past tears and into the silent processing phase, where she was trying to figure out what went wrong in her master plan. What went wrong was me. Because Lisa had bet everything on the idea that I would stay clueless. That I wouldn't dig. that I wouldn't ask the right questions or connect the right dots. Unfortunately for her, I had spent the last 12 hours turning into a fully operational revenge machine. I took my time looking around the house she had no intention of keeping, before finally locking eyes with her again. "So," I said, "since we're being honest now, tell me, when exactly did you decide I didn't need to be part of your future?" Lisa looked destroyed. "Christopher, I never." I held up a hand. "Don't bother. Just give me the timeline." She hesitated, not because she didn't have an answer, but because she had to calculate how much of the truth she could give me while still clinging to hope. 6 months ago, she finally admitted. I nodded. "Right. And how long have you been seeing Mark?" Her entire body locked up. I smiled. "Lisa, come on. Just finish what you started." She swallowed hard. It wasn't like. I leaned back against the wall. "Lisa, do you really think I care about the details? You could have held hands in a church parking lot or rented out a Ferris wheel for 2, it doesn't matter. The only thing I need to know is when it started." Lisa looked down. "A few months after I started looking at places. So 4 months ago. Right around the time she started pulling cash instead of using our joint account. Right around the time Karen got suspiciously involved. Right around the time Lisa had mentally rewritten our marriage into a countdown clock." I inhaled slowly. "All right. Good. Now that we're done with that part, let's move on to something more interesting." Lisa blinked at me. What do you mean?" I smiled. "Oh, Lisa. Did you really think this was just a conversation?" She didn't move. "See, here's the thing," I continued. "You spent months quietly erasing me from your life. But the problem is, Lisa, you forgot to check if I was holding the eraser." Her breathing hitched. "Christopher, you've been making moves behind my back?" "Great. I made some too." Lisa's hands gripped her lap. "What did you do?" I shrugged. "Just some light paperwork. You know, updating accounts, transferring assets, changing beneficiaries. The boring stuff you probably thought I wouldn't bother with." Lisa's face paled. I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen, and turned it toward her. "Recognize this?" I asked. Lisa stared at the document. She knew exactly what it was. It was a legal separation agreement. Signed. Filed. Finalized. Lisa let out a tiny, broken sound. "You, already?" "Yep," I said cheerfully. "Went ahead and handled that for you." "You're welcome, by the way. I made sure it was as clean as possible." She looked stunned. "But you didn't even talk to me." "Lisa," I interrupted, "you were literally planning to leave me in secret. You don't get to act shocked that I beat you to it." She opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. "What about the house?" I laughed. Actually laughed. "The house? Oh, Lisa. That's the best part." I swiped to the next document on my phone. "This," I said, showing her, "is the finalized listing. I put the house up for sale this morning. Already have 2 offers." Lisa physically flinched. You can't." I tilted my head. "Lisa, we're separating. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel